Enchantments. You know them, I know them. Let's rank them. So as you know, this is a tier list ranking video, and I will have categories for all enchantments related to tools, armor, and weapons. Starting it off, let's look at the helmet enchantments. There are only 2 enchantments specific to helmets, and they are Aqua Affinity and Respiration. Let's look at Aqua Affinity first. Aqua Affinity has no levels to it, with it only increasing the rate of underwater mining speed. Although pretty useful, especially if you're around the ocean, all around it doesn't help you that much, so C tier. Respiration has 3 tiers to it that extend your underwater breathing time. It is great if you are just casually exploring the ocean or building underwater, but you might as well just use a conduit if you're doing anything major, so solid B tier overall. There is only one specific leggings enchant, and that is the new Swift Sneak that will be added in 1.20, and as the name implies, it allows you to sneak faster. Pretty cool enchant that can be useful for deep dark and building, but you aren't really going to be sneaking around all that often, so C tier. Now boots have 4 specific enchantments, and the first one we will be looking at is Feather Falling. Feather Falling reduces fall damage, so it is extremely useful as falling is one of the most common deaths, and being able to reduce your fall damage is useful in many scenarios. So with that, it is our first A tier. Strider is another specific boot enchantment that has 3 levels, with each level increasing underwater movement speed. It's pretty helpful and a great quality of life enchant, but overall it doesn't affect you all that much, so B tier. Soul Speed is a newer enchantment that has 3 levels to it, and each level increases walking speed on soul sand or soul soil. It can be pretty handy in soul sand valleys, but since it has a pretty niche use, it's going to have to go in C tier. Our last boot specific enchant is Frostwalker, which basically allows you to walk on water by making the water into ice. It also prevents the damage the player would take from standing on magma blocks. It's a very cool vanity enchantment, but unfortunately it is our first F tier due to the lack of utility. Finally, we got to enchants that can go in all armor types, starting off with the classic Protection. Protection is pretty simple, having 4 levels, with each level reducing most types of damage. For its versatility, utility, and keeping you alive, it is our very first S tier. There are other subtypes of Protection, with Projectile Protection being our first one. As the name implies, it reduces projectile damage to you, only really been helpful when fighting skeletons, so it goes into D tier. Blast Protection is another subtype of Protection that reduces explosion damage and knockback. Doesn't have very many uses except for protecting you against TNT and creepers, so it is another F tier. Our second best protection is actually Fire Protection, as it reduces fire damage and burn time. Pretty useful in the Nether where fire is abundant, but standard protection is just better overall. Since it is more viable in more situations, it goes above Blast and Projectile into C tier. Our last armor enchantment is Thorns, which reflects some of the damage taken when hit, but it also reduces armor durability faster. It is a decent enchant in PvP, but not all that great in survival, so for that it goes in C tier. Now, there is another enchantment that can go on armor, and it is actually our first curse, the Curse of Binding, which makes it so you cannot remove your armor unless you die, which is obviously the worst if you're a hardcore player like myself. Interesting, but only really good for trolling, so it of course goes into F tier. We will now look at the specific tool enchantments, starting off with the Fishing Rod, which only has Lure and Luck of the Sea. Lure has 3 levels that decrease the time it takes to get a bite. Pretty alright for Fishing Rod, but not really game changing, so it's going to go in D tier. Luck of the Sea also has 3 levels, which increase the rate of catching rare loot. Since rare loot is the main reason for fishing, it is better than Lure, but there are still better methods of actually getting loot, so it just goes into C tier. Since there aren't any other tool specific enchants, we look at the rest of the tool enchants, starting it out with the standard Efficiency. Efficiency has 5 levels that all increase mining speed, which is extremely useful in many situations as it goes on every tool. It also increases the stun effect of an axe, which is just a bonus. Easy S tier. Our last tool enchants are Silk Touch and Fortune, which basically are opposites of each other. Silk Touch allows you to mine blocks that will drop as blocks instead of breaking into other items or other blocks. For example, when you break glass, instead of no longer existing, you will get the glass block, or pane. Very useful when conserving resources or obtaining rare items, so that will go into A tier. Like I said, Fortune is the other enchant that goes on tools. It is the opposite of Silk Touch, having 3 levels that increase certain item drop chances from blocks, such as ores like diamond or quartz. Very useful when gathering up ores, as well as crops, so it also goes into A tier. We will now be looking at weapon enchants, which include swords, tridents, bows, and crossbows. Our first sword enchant is the classic Sharpness enchant, which has 5 levels that increase your weapon damage. Sharpness is the pinnacle of sword enchantments and the one you most likely want to have on your sword. sword. Jack of all trades enchantment is usually better than Master of One, since no one's going to be switching out a Bane of Arthropod's sword every time you see a spider. So Sharpness is an easy A tier for its versatility and function. The Bane of Arthropods is the bane of many enchanters because it's not very useful. It increases damage and applies slowness to arthropod mobs, which basically are just the bug mobs like spiders, silverfish, and bees. No one ever really needs to kill these mobs, and Sharpness is just as good, so F tier. Smite is similar to Bane of Arthropods, but instead it increases damage to undead mobs such as zombies and skeletons. These are more abundant than arthropods, and because you can also kill the Wither easily with Smite, it goes above arthropods and into D tier. Fire Aspect is an interesting enchant as it has many pros and cons. Like the name implies, it sets your target on fire, dealing continuous damage. This, however, could literally backfire into you getting hit back on fire, which is of course not good. It can also cook mobs such as cows and chickens, so considering all the pros and cons, it goes into B tier. Looting is a useful sword enchant that increases the loot earned from mobs. This can help whenever you just kill a mob or are specifically looking for those rare wither skeleton skulls. You always want more loot, so this goes into B tier. Knockback is another interesting enchantment similar to Fire Aspect, as many people find it to have some cons. Knockback, as the name implies, knocks mobs back away from you when hit. The main con people say is that knockbacking skeletons or other ranged mobs gives them more room to hit you. I, however, don't really see this as a con because you could just use your ranged weapon when that happens. Knockback is fairly useful enchant and should go on your sword, so that will go into B tier. Our last sword enchant is actually a Java exclusive, and it is Sweeping Edge. This enchantment increases sweeping attack damage. Not all that useful, as you most likely aren't going to be facing a massive horde all that often, but it is decent to have, so it goes into B tier. Before we get into our rarest enchant weapons, subscribe to my channel if you would like me to make more tier list videos just like this. Also, if you'd like to get a special tag in my Discord, click the link in the description to join my Discord first of all, then provide a screenshot that you are one of my first 100 subscribers. Act fast, as I'm almost at 100 subs. Now we look at the rarest weapon, the Trident. The Trident has a total of 4 specific enchants. The first one we will look at is Channeling, which allows Tridents to channel a bolt of lightning toward a hit entity. This can function only during thunderstorms and if the target is unobstructed by opaque blocks. It can also turn creepers into charge creepers, which is the only way to get heads in vanilla Minecraft. Overall cool, but not super useful, so B tier. Loyalty is another great Trident enchantment that has 3 levels, each making the Trident return faster to you. Must have enchantment if you use Tridents often as a ranged weapon, so A tier. Riptide is a really fun enchantment, making your Trident launch you when you throw it in water or rain. Great for mobility and transportation, so it is another A tier. Our last Trident enchantment is Impaling, which makes it so your Trident deals extra damage to ocean mobs like drowned or fish. Alright enchantment for a Trident, but overall very lacking, D tier. There are 4 specific bow enchantments, so let's start off with the classic Power. Power increases arrow damage from a bow, pretty simple and useful, so it's gonna go into A tier. Punch makes your arrows knock back entities, similar to knockback on a sword, but since your enemies are already further away, a ranged weapon punching them doesn't really have the same cons as a knockback on a sword, so this is an A tier. Flame makes it so your arrows set your target on fire, but unlike Fire Aspect on a sword, there isn't much of a con here since you aren't melee and they can't really hit you with fire easily. So without that con, it is above Fire Aspect and into A tier. Infinity is personally one of my favorite enchants and my favorite bow enchantment, making it so you can fire infinite arrows by only having 1 arrow in your inventory. It makes it so you don't have to worry about wasting arrows or having enough inventory space for a ton of arrows, so that makes it an easy A tier. There are only 3 specific crossbow enchantments, so let's look at Quick Charge first. Quick Charge decreases crossbow charging time, allowing you to fire faster. Super useful and a must-have on a crossbow, so this is an A tier. Piercing allows your arrows to pass through multiple entities, but it is also good in PvP as it passes through shields. Pretty good crossbow enchantment, but not as good as Quick Charge, so it's going to go into B tier. Now for Multishot, this allows your crossbow to shoot 3 arrows at a time. Not super useful as a ranged weapon. Just like my Sweeping Edge critique, you most likely aren't going to be facing massive hordes all that often, so D tier. There are only 3 enchantments that can go on tools, armor, and weapons, and comment below if you know them before I reveal. Our second curse is the Curse of Vanishing. Just like the name implies, it makes your item vanish when you die. Just like the Binding Curse, it is an interesting enchantment, but obviously not very useful, so it goes into F tier. Unbreaking increases item durability, literally making your tools not break as fast. Super useful as you never want your items to break, so go straight into S tier. Now the one you've all been waiting for, Mending. It allows your tools, armors, and weapons to never break as long as you get XP, making all your gear permanent, so obviously it is an S tier. I will have my complete 1 through 40 ranking in the description below, but don't forget to share the video with your friends to show them the true enchantment tier list.